It comes as no surprise that for centuries the night sky has mesmerized, prompting a popular song and distinctive reactive clap from any native Texan. The early days of manned spaceflight, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy sought out Texas's bright potential for the future of all mankind. For decades, Johnson Space Center, serving as mission control, has been a grounding force for a myriad of interstellar travelers. The stars at night are not all that is big and bright in the Lone Star State. Many discoveries have been made, prompting endless endeavors as curiosity leads some of the most innovative minds to persevere at the cusp of human ingenuity, aiming to set foot on the red planet.
One giant leap for mankind.
February 1st, I took the picture that kind of made me famous with a Canon D60, which was a 6-megapixel digital SLR camera, and it was one of the early models of DSLRs to be available, and really the first one at 6 megapixel. Up until then, the few DSLRs that were out were 3 to 4 megapixel. This was the first one at 6, and I had only had it a couple of months when we took this photo. I've been an avid follower of the space program since I was a kid, and we had seen a previous re-entry of the space shuttle when it comes in over the United States, really over here in the backyard one evening, and that was a spectacular sight. It was in twilight, and it left a green ion trail as it streaked across the sky. Well, I knew this one was also likely going to re-enter over the continental United States instead of through the Gulf of Mexico to Florida, and so the night before the expected return, I had been logged on to one of the NASA websites that show you the plots of the landing, and I knew that if they made the approach for a 9:15 landing in Florida, that would probably put them right over our house at about 8 a.m. We knew the track. I knew pretty much that they were going to fly over Dallas and Tyler, and so we were in the backyard awaiting re-entry. An hour earlier, they had done their deorbit burn, and so we knew they were committed to coming in on that orbit, and so just a little before 8 o'clock in the morning, we went in the backyard with a video camera and our digital SLR and waited for the arrival. Cameras are much more sophisticated. Just as when I took that picture, the iPhone didn't exist. The features that are in my current cameras didn't exist in that one. The D60 was a relatively large camera for its time in terms of the megapixel, but it's basically the same size as your little camera that you're shooting this with now. The lenses I used at that time were relatively slow. The lenses I have now are far brighter and sharper and much faster than the lenses I had at that time. And the camera has 3 times as many megapixels with a much higher resolution on each megapixel at that too, with more autofocus points and more ability to track moving objects and shoot them in focus. I grew up with a little bit of a news background. I went to a media-oriented high school. I was active in yearbook and the school paper when I was in college. And so I understood that this was an important image. These were people that were important to me, and I felt if they were important to me, they'd be important to other people. I thought this news story was of international in scope, and I really felt the picture needed to be released to the media. And so right after we realized what had happened and what images we had, we were in contact with both the local TV stations and the local newspaper. Immediately went up there to upload the videotape as well as the digital stills. When I was shooting the picture through the camera and looking through the long lens, the image itself was still just really a point of light. These croppings of the pictures that are in the various papers and on the cover of Time are a very significant cropping of the overall image, even out of that 6-megapixel camera. And I'm looking at basically this very bright fireball. My wife, on the other hand, is looking at a LCD screen like your video camera has right there. And so she's seeing a little bit more of a zoomed-in image that's also not quite as bright. And she saw separate fragments, much quicker than I did. And when she saw those fragments, she actually states, "Why does it look like it's breaking up?" And I'm not quite sure I knew what she was talking about at that moment. I mean, I thought I saw some parallel contrails, which is what she was talking to, but I didn't see the details she initially did. So it wasn't until 2 or 3 minutes later we had come in the house that I looked at the back of the camera and started cropping in the images that I realized we had captured up the breakup of the shuttle. And I recognized it as that because I had seen other spacecraft images that burned up on reentry, like when the Skylab Skylab had burnt up over the Pacific and the photographs of that. And this was exactly the same thing. There were hundreds of fragments basically flying off in mostly parallel, but a few non-parallel linear directions. And I knew that it had been a disruption of the vehicle, because that was definitely nothing that would have been expected at this point in the flight on re-entry. I developed a hole in the pit of my stomach, and I knew that that was not a survivable incident. About 4 minutes after the shuttle disintegrated here, we heard this giant envelope of sound, which was the multiple sonic booms of all of the different fragments of the shuttle disintegrating and slowing down under the speed of sound. And as each of those pieces slowed down, they created their own boom. And so it created a very long sound, not just a sharp thud-thud that you typically hear of breaking the sonic boom, but this giant envelope of noise. And that's what most people heard. Most people didn't know anything had happened until they heard that noise, and then they looked up and just saw the smoke. By then, it had already been 5 or 6 minutes since the shuttle had gone by and actually wrecked.
The picture that we've been showing you all morning long is the final moments of the space shuttle Columbia as it broke up mid-flight, 200,000 feet, traveling 12,500 miles an hour.
At that moment, I felt my first duty was to get these images to the news services. We very quickly made the phone calls at that time and let them know that what had happened and what we'd had. The television crews that were covering re-entry were still talking about the fact that the shuttle was running late. And the shuttle doesn't run late. It lands plus or minus 3 seconds on that tarmac. And the fact that it was running late was a clear indication that they didn't quite yet know what had happened, even on the national news circuit. Within an hour of this incident, the Associated Press was moving that image out on their wire to newspapers all over the world. Within 24 hours, 2.4 billion people had seen these images through the various outlets of the Associated Press, either in the newspaper covers, on websites, on news media websites that were around even then. The image is one of the most seen images in a single news cycle. While I was technically a citizen journalist, the distribution of the image was very much through traditional media. The Tyler Morning Telegraph front page actually was put on display in the Library of Congress in the Thomas Jefferson Annex for a while. The Time cover is in the memorial display at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington. I have done showings both in galleries in Los Angeles and in the Tyler Museum of Art. I did a show of a lot of my work. And then I've had some individual pictures in other galleries from time to time. I came to Texas approximately 27 years ago. I was recruited here out of my training program in New York City, where I was born and raised. At that time, they needed more interventional cardiology here in Tyler, and my eventual partners recruited me to come down here, and we brought our family, and I brought my sister's family down here, and we've all been working in the local health scene pretty much ever since. Interventional cardiology is my primary job. I kind of refer to photojournalism as an avocation, because I'm told it's a hobby until they pay you, and then it becomes an avocation. And clearly this has become more than a hobby. I've got well over 1,000 images in the AP archive now. It only goes a few days where some picture doesn't get pulled out of the archive and used in a newspaper somewhere in the world. Now, I've also managed to use my photography to sort of get closer to other hobbies. For the Associated Press, I have been in the pits of NASCAR. I've been alongside the track in Formula One. I have been on the sidelines with the Dallas Cowboys and photographed games from that position and that vantage point. It's always a learning experience, and it's always a lot of fun to do that.
My fellow Americans, this day has brought terrible news and great sadness to our country. At 9 o'clock this morning, Mission Control in Houston lost contact with our space shuttle Columbia. A short time later, debris was seen falling from the skies above Texas. The Columbia is lost. There are no survivors. On board was a crew of 7. Colonel Rick Husband, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Anderson, Commander Laurel Clark, Captain David Brown, Commander William McCool, Dr. Kulpna Shavla, and Ilan Ramon, a colonel in the Israeli Air Force. These men and women assumed great risk in the service to all humanity. In an age when spaceflight has come to seem almost routine, it is easy to overlook the dangers of travel by rocket and the difficulties of navigating the fierce outer atmosphere of the Earth. The crew of the shuttle Columbia did not return safely to Earth, yet we can pray that all are safely home. May God bless the grieving families. May God continue to bless America.